has an affiliate group. Our local health officials have an affiliate group. County administrators and have an affiliate group. Solid waste managers, human services, IT, planning, and the clerks of the boards and councils. So that kind of that 8 core groups that report to you all, and that's who we work closely with. We do not serve the independent elected officials. They have a separate entities. We have delivered some contract services in the past for them on contract basis, but never on policy, but more on running conferences for them or something like that. We had a long-term contract with the county auditors for about a half a dozen years. But we do work closely with them and defer to them on a number of policy pieces in their arena. Page 4, you see a little bit more about our board of directors. They are the oversight for the operations of the agency and the organization. We rotate east-west between our officers by our bylaws. So currently Councilmember Stevens is the current president from San Juan County. Mary Cooney from Spokane County will be the incoming president. Lisa Janicki from Skagit County is second vice president. And Michael Largent out of Whitman County is our past president. So that's the rotation. We go east-west, so we'll be electing currently someone from Eastern Washington will be the election process for this next year. Then our board of directors is comprised of, again, those executive committee members. Our past presidents remain on the board of directors. We elect Eastern Washington representatives, Western Washington representatives, and then the counties of 180,000 or more also have a seat on the board of directors. You can see who our current board is. It's usually about 25 or so individuals. It really depends on how many past presidents we have, which fluctuates depending on how many of them choose to not run again. Councilmember Stevens is term limited through their charter. He will be leaving this year. This will be his last year as a member of WSAC and a county council member. We have 4 counties that have term limits through the charter process. Even though the average length of a county commissioner is about 8 years, about 85% of our membership turns over in 8 years. And so it's always an interesting dynamic that we have term limits in counties, because it seems like either the public or the member themselves choose to not continue to run.
Councilmember Stevens retires. I'd like to put in a bid for his car.
That's not a company car.
Oh.
Nor an association car. I don't think you want one of ours. So,
Not buying Teslas?
No, we're not. So then the 21-22 activities that we've been really focusing in on is obviously implementing a strategic plan that is adopted as part of our annual budgeting process. The board of directors is intimately involved in the litigation for the association. We'll talk more about our litigation program. We did not have a litigation program up until about 2018, where we entered into that realm. They have the fiduciary responsibility and oversight for the organization as well, and then ultimately make appointments to committees and statewide boards and commissions, et cetera. They don't set policy in terms of public policy. That's retained by ultimately the Legislative Steering Committee and then into the membership themselves. So a little bit about that. A little message from me, I've been in around county government since 1984 when I started working with Lewis County. And there's no question, I think the last 2.5 years have been some of the most challenging for county government in many regards. At the same time, we have been probably as fiscally healthy as we have been in a long time. Our county fiscal health has generally been much better than it has over the past 20 years. Sales tax revenue generation has been really good. ARPA funds have been providing a lot of flexibility for us, coronavirus relief funds. But I've also been through 2 major recessions during my period of time, and the third one coming from a timber county in the 80s. Fiscal health is not many years away from being threatened. And so particularly when about 75% of most county budgets is in personnel and labor costs, healthcare costs, retirement costs. Those fixed costs generally outstrip our capabilities usually. So while we feel pretty confident in our current fiscal health around the 39 counties, we also know the fragility of that as well. In the past 2.5 years, we've spent a lot of time pivoting into the coronavirus pandemic and helping counties respond to that, helping them administer through that, govern through that, understanding the phases and the guidelines and the changing metrics and all of those regions once they were created. We at the staff level were in constant contact with the executive branch. We brought them to meet with members. We were as equally frustrated. I know the officers more than once wrote letters and communiques to the executive branch or the Secretary of Health expressing our frustration. So a lot still going on in that world, but definitely phasing out of what I'd call COVID response. We do have a staff member now that is dedicated towards assisting counties in the ARPA response and ARPA funding and technical guidance associated with that. We're also trying to tell one story. There's 1.5 billion in ARPA funding came to the 39 counties. And so we were trying to tell one story about how that $1.5 billion is being utilized, making sure our delegation understands it, making sure the state understands it, and ultimately making sure the public sees the accountability for those expenditures across the 39 counties. So we've got that going on too. We've got till 2024 to obligate those resources, 2026 to expend those. So we'll be working on that for a number of years to come. The association, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'll burst in every once in a while. I just wanted to say on the virtual assembly, those started out as a way to help all our members deal with the continually changing information during the lockdown and during COVID, and which I think was very helpful for our members. And as Eric said, it's been transitioning out. But a side effect of not just being good information for our members is our staff is getting to know a lot of the people in the agencies a lot better than they did before, and the agencies are now realizing WSAC is a go-to place to get their message out if they're doing a new program. So it's helping not only just the members, but our staff have closer ties with some of these agencies versus just the legislature.
Yeah, great, thank you. It's nice to see you under the beating here. We've worked together on a number of projects. It's good to see you. And gets back to my comment about us. We had historically delivered services to the County Auditors Association on the conference side. We didn't deal with their policy arena and all the things they deal with, but conference planning. So nice to see you again.
And those Monday meetings have also made our members, especially the new ones, a lot more aware of these affiliate organizations and groups like the CRAB, and that, you know, for many people they were completely oblivious to them until they started showing up on Mondays and giving briefings and made the connection.
So those will continue on, and if there is ever a subject matter that would be, you think would be of interest to the overall membership, please don't hesitate to let us know. We try and book about a month ahead, and recognize that sometimes things are time sensitive, and we will break into our regular programming for time sensitive type of information that needs to be in front of the members as well. So our budget and administration, finance, it is probably one of those things that goes under the summary. You know, people look at the bottom line, and that's great. We constantly look at the fiduciary responsibility, constantly looking at the internal controls, constantly making sure that there is good governance of the overall operation and the fiduciary responsibility of the board, and we take that very seriously. We want to honor the integrity of the fund sources that come to us, and so we're very diligent in that arena. We do a biennial audit. We're in the midst of that audit right now. We did field work. Our auditors went about 2 weeks ago doing the field work, and we report that to the board of directors every 2 years on the results of the audit. We work hard on internal controls. We did some internal restructuring of the organization, and so one of the focal points for the audit team this year will be looking at internal controls. Did we make sure that we modified our internal controls, recognizing that we had eliminated a fiscal staff position? I took on some oversight internal controls. We have another staff member looking at internal controls. All of those to buffer the main finance person, Bridget Lockling, from making sure that there are good checks and balances within the system. And so that'll be a big focal point of this one. And looking at our due structure, constantly looking to make sure there is fairness and equity in that. It's largely population-based in most of our formulas, but not universally. There are some formulas that are driven by other methodologies as well. And then looking at an investment policy, we try and keep about 3 months, sometimes up to 6 months in a reserve. We don't desire to build a big reserve because that money comes from you all generally. And so we're desiring to maintain enough to manage cash flow. That's our big focal point. We don't have other funds to borrow from. This really is the organization, very similar to a small business, and we have to make sure we have enough cash flow to manage the organization. And it's a little bit like you with property tax. We get a big boost of resources in the early year from dues, and then we spend down throughout the rest of the year. So by the end of the year, cash flow becomes our biggest concern, and making sure we have enough cash reserve, because oftentimes we do operate programs that are on a reimbursable basis as well, where we'll incur the cost, then seek payment for some of those programs and services. The biggest revenue change that really has occurred in the last 7 years is shown in the chart in the middle of page 9, and that is the establishment of our litigation program. And that was after a number of years of deliberation by the membership. The pros and cons of being a litigious organization was really analyzed. They chose to. So we collect $400,000 a year in our litigation program. We'll talk more about how that money's been utilized and how it's forecasted to be utilized here in the future. You can see where most of our revenue comes from. We are largely dues supported. It ranges from about 40, I think the low of 43%, if I recall, in the past 10 years or so, to generally about a little over 50%. And then we do services, contracts for services. For example, when we delivered service to the county auditors under a contract for their conference services, we deliver services to the public health affiliate. We deliver services to the county engineers affiliate. We did a marbled murrelet study on behalf of the timber counties. It's a shorebird that is a long way from you all, but dramatically affects the ability for us to potentially generate revenue off of county timberlands. And so we do certain activities that are targeted at a set of counties, and we do a fee for service in that case.
And ironically, murrelets actually impact this county too, because there's a local power company that attempted to build wind turbines north of Willapa Hills. So we're all the counties are connected in ways sometimes we don't even realize.
Yeah. It's really true. The Columbia River Treaty, which has largely been focused on the Columbia River counties, there are a number of counties in Western Washington whose PUDs are buying power out of that system, have a tremendous interest in it, even though it's oftentimes viewed as what might be going on in the Columbia River Basin. It has statewide implications.
Well, murrelets won that one.
Yeah, yep. Well, they've won a number of them, I think. And that study ultimately showed, it was cost us $100,000. It showed an economic impact of about $1.5 million to counties, and we were able to get a $10 million capital investment to buy replacement lands from the legislature. So it was a pretty good investment for that $100,000 for those timber counties in particular. So you can see, again, a little bit of our cash flow elements. We were about a $3.4 to $3.6 million annual budget. We're carrying a cash flow, as you can see, and ending reserves of anywhere from about $500,000 to almost $900,000 this year. We've been pretty conservative in dues increases, as well as pretty managing our budget pretty well. You can see with well, really I would say only 2 exceptions. 2018, where we ended up with a good reserve of $230,000, and in 2019 we overexpended. So generally managing the budget pretty well. I think the major thing that folks recognize us for is advocacy with the legislature. Page 11 starts kind of the discussion around advocacy. I would say that this has probably been the biggest transition in my tenure with WSAC, and Councilmember Stevens has heard this from me before. It is the work that we do with agencies. We spend a lot more time with the agencies than we historically used to. And we have to spend a lot more time with the court in operations and court rules that are either adopted by the state Supreme Court, the administrator of the courts. I remind folks that the caseload standards for indigent defense were done through court rule. So us having to pay attention to court rules is one of those things that is we're much more in tune with than we used to be, as well as the agencies. So much rulemaking authority is now granted to the agencies. In the details of implementing legislation is oftentimes cumbersome and is oftentimes political divisive, so they don't deal with it and they pass it to the agency. So we spend now a lot of time with the agency, whether it's the Growth Management Act, whether it's something in Department of Ecology, whether it's something in one of the agencies that we have to work with. We spend a lot of time now on that. This was a 60-day session, a legislative session. It was the second time for a remote only, so as you know, they did not do in person. That worked well for some situations where we were able to have a lot of our members testify remotely, not have to make a 2, 4, 6, 8-hour drive for a 3-minute testimony. They were able to just dial in, multitask through the meeting, give their testimony on behalf of the association or their county, and then be done. So that worked out great. At the same time, if a legislator wanted to hide from us, it was pretty easy for them to hide from us as well. That was not universally true. Most representatives and senators stayed pretty engaged and active with us, but boy, at crunch time, they could hide. So we're, I would say it is a significant budget, $64 billion, probably almost doubled in the last 12 plus years, probably doubled. Obviously, McCleary decision in education and the state fully funding K through 12 made a big jump in that. But again, they probably passed about $5 billion more than in a supplemental budget year. Some of that was ARPA dollars, but some of that just was the same situation that you all had. Sales tax was booming for the state of Washington, and that is their major revenue source. And so while it's a small part of our budget, it's a huge part of the state budget. Is it sustainable? I guess time will tell from that perspective, and hopefully they're not creating an unsustainable state budget with starting programs and doing services with sales tax that probably is not going to continue at the pace it was.
Eric, do you have any sense of whether or not the timing and new legislation where the state was started requiring organizations like Amazon, for example, to collect sales taxes, is there a correlation between when we saw this big up ramp in sales tax revenues with that statute? I've never gone back to look and see what the timing.
There will certainly be some of it. It will certainly be true for counties because destination-based sales tax, which actually was the result of a South Dakota federal lawsuit at the U.S. Supreme Court. It was a Waiver case where South Dakota sued to say you need to collect our state sales tax. You are doing business in the state of South Dakota. You need to pay our sales tax, and they prevailed at the United States Supreme Court. Which then meant those counties, those states that are sales tax were part of a compact. Most of the entities had already began to do destination-based sales tax. But now that we have 9-digit code destination-based sales tax is now being collected into counties in a way that it never was. I don't know if it affected the state to the degree that it affected us, because they had a brick and mortar sales tax collection before, that if you had a bricks and mortar store in your state and you did
Well, Amazon collects the 8.7 here, and I know the state's getting their 6.5 out of that. So
they are, absolutely.
So I'm thinking it's working.
Yeah, I think it's working for them as well. It certainly is one of the reasons that we are seeing sales tax increase in an unincorporated portion of the county now. There's no doubt about it.
My wife is doing her part.
Yeah.
So we did commission a consultant to do a kind of quick tax study for us, and it was probably 2020, and it was about 30% of our retail sales tax was Amazon, because we wanted to know that exact same thing, like how much of this is people just locked down and how much of it is Amazon, or the two are related, but anyway, it was a big impact on being able to receive that sales tax, and I don't know what the exact date was when we started collecting.
I'm just thinking if it's tied to the Mayfair case, then I can see it continuing.
Yeah. I think there's a bubble. We actually have been trying to work with Department of Revenue to do a little bit of more targeted projection associated with that issue of how much is it based on destination-based sales tax compared to not. And one of the challenges for the state is an element of the state's ability to audit out-of-state companies is still part of the unanswered question in regards to both the Supreme Court case and not having federal statutory guidance and authority to permit that type of activity. So the type of audit work that the Department of Revenue would do to an in-state seller compared to an out-of-state seller still lacks clarity. And then, I think our biggest disappointment legislatively was the transportation package. from the funding of the county road system. We certainly recognize that there were a lot of great transportation projects within the state system that are occurring in local government, in local communities. The investment into maintenance into the state system was really positive. Transit obviously got some good sets of resources, but the county road system, which is 50% of the state transportation road system, received only $80 million over 16 years, and that was greatly inadequate to, really greatly inadequate for the overall need that we have within that system. So we are definitely anxious to get back with the legislature to talk about the county road fund needs, the county transportation system needs. The county road fund used to be one of our most strong funds, and it's just really not the case. It's not nearly as strong as it once was. And part of that is because of the challenge with its primary revenue source on most counties being a property tax capped at 1% and not having really strong revenue growth in additional construction happening in the unincorporated area. So definitely a challenge for us and definitely something we'll be dealing with, but you can see there's some other issues associated with that. Our Legislative Steering Committee on page 12, you can get a little sense of who that is. All 39 counties plus the 4 county executives have a representative on our Legislative Steering Committee. It is the policy body for the association. They recommend a legislative agenda to the board of directors, or excuse me, to the membership at our annual November meeting. We have a large policy document that governs and guides our direction for policy. But on an annual or biennial basis, we will adopt a legislative agenda that will be the proactive agenda for the association. We certainly are in the midst of preparing for the 2023 legislative session. We had our first meeting in Pierce County in May. We've got subcommittee work going on through the session. We've got another legislative steering committee meeting in September where we'll narrow that. We probably went from several hundred ideas down to 60 ideas. And over the summer, we'll be reprioritizing and looking at those 60 ideas to see which ones are most beneficial to the majority of counties moving forward. We have 2 co-chairs, Commissioner Dean from Jefferson County, Commissioner Peck from Franklin. We always rotate east and west to have, or don't rotate, but always have 2 members as co-chairs from the east and the west. And then you can see the rest of the roster right there. So we're busily engaged right now in the agenda development for 2023. Looking through a myriad of areas and issues and the political viability of some of our ideas. And some of those, we know that there may not be political viability to them, but it's certainly points that we're gonna make and things that we think are important. You can see a little bit of the, and I probably will talk more and just point you to our 2022 end of session report if you have questions around the outcome of this last legislative session. Obviously, there were things that we were very satisfied with and things that we're very frustrated with. I think one of the things that we continue to be satisfied with but guarded against, and including to the point where we're litigating, is the Blake decision. The Blake decision ruled that the manner in which the state was dealing with possession of illegal drugs was unconstitutional, and in doing so, required the resentencing, vacation, and repayment of legal financial obligations. We have been fortunate to see the state accepting that financial obligation at this point, and setting up a system to seek ongoing reimbursement of legal financial obligations through the administrator of the court starting in July of 2023. But resentencing, vacations, all of those will continue to be costs associated with owned by the county, and we want reimbursement for those. And so we are also, we'll talk about this, we're prepared to continue litigation in that realm, as well as any civil lawsuits that might come up, wanting to make sure that those are tendered to the state and are not held by the county as well. We've also worked with the Auditors Association, the Prosecutors Association, that as you do your annual audit and you have to do any potential unfunded liabilities through litigation, making sure that the county recognizes that that is not a county unfunded liability. That is an unfunded liability of the state of Washington. It's their court system. We prosecuted based on a state of Washington law that was ruled unconstitutional. they have to be obligated for those compensation, those payments. Our federal priorities are on page 16. We've got several of those that have some linkages to you all. Obviously, one of our number one priorities, working with the National Association of Counties, was to make sure that you all got your direct appropriation of ARPA funds, that we didn't go through the coronavirus relief process that made us go through the state of Washington, go contracts through the state of Washington, seek reimbursement from the state of Washington, that we were able to get those resources directly. And so all 39 of our counties got a direct appropriation, or their direct tranche. Most of our counties have not gotten their second tranche of funds, of ARPA funds as well. And so that was one of our primary challenges of we wanted, and we were able to achieve that. And we continue to try and make sure that counties are not having to utilize their own resources in the pandemic response, that those are funded through state and or federal funds. The Medicaid inmate exclusion has been a long-standing issue for us, where the federal government in Medicaid program has a restriction on the use of Medicaid when someone is incarcerated at the point of arrest, so not adjudicated, not found guilty. So as soon as they are arrested, we take them to the doctor, and the day before, when they were free, when they were outside of jail, they might have been able to utilize Medicaid. Now that they're in our incarcerated and in our county jail, we now pick up their Medicare expense, or their medical expenses. And so we don't see the fairness in that, and so we have been working to change that federal law. That we understand post adjudication, that's all right, we get that, but we don't like that part either. But certainly at the point of arrest, and when you're still innocent and considered innocent, then you should still have that federal benefit. At the same time, we're working on a waiver at the state level. The state has put forward what's called a Section 1115 waiver to waive that federal requirement, and that has been successfully done in New Mexico. And so we're optimistic that we potentially could get that waiver, so that at least pre-adjudication, that we would continue to be able to bill Medicaid when we have an inmate who is seeking medical care. PILT, payment in lieu of taxes in secure schools. Secure schools is not a big program for you all. You have to have trees in a federal forest to get secure schools. This is kind of the carryover from the old Spotted Owl payments. This is kind of lost revenue from the Spotted Owl program, or lost the Spotted Owl implementing the Northwest Forest Plan. PILT is payment in lieu of taxes on federal lands, and so you do get a decent PILT payment, if I recall, of about $180,000. That goes to your county current expense fund. You also get the Department of Energy payment as well, and we note that, so make sure our delegation is constantly reminded about the importance of that Department of Energy payment as well. So you can see across the board those public land payments. So secure schools and PILT, big issue. It's combined, as you can see, is almost $40 million for our counties just in PILT and SRS. So it's a major payment for us. We combine this and look at this as PILT is really your property tax. It's the property tax that the federal government should be paying because they own land within our boundaries, and they don't. And then we look at secure schools as it is more the excise tax. It is the historic excise tax that was paid on timber. So when there's private harvest on federal on private lands, and excise tax is paid, we look at that as this is the excise tax. This is the timber harvest excise tax that is paid by the public ownership of federal lands. That went away, and so there's a repayment of that. You can see our Federal Issues Committee. Maybe I should make comment on both our Federal Issues Committee and our Legislative Steering Committee. Those are open to application from the membership. The appointments are nominations by the President to the Board of Directors for confirmation. We do that every August and approve those every September. That's true of the Federal Issues and Relations Committee as well. So if anyone is interested in serving on those, let us know. We try and have at least one member on the Federal Issues Committee from each of the 10 congressional districts. And our Legislative Steering Committee, each county gets a representative as well. Litigation program is on page 18, and that is, I think. Yes.
Excuse me, there's one thing I wanted to mention too. In addition to the PILT, we're a little unique in that we have the only operating commercial nuclear power station right across the river. And so within a 35-mile radius of that plant, the annual generation taxes levied by the state, which I would guess are currently around $7 million a year, come back into the local communities for schools, fire districts, and other things. And I only bring it up because us and Benton are probably the only counties, maybe Grant.
Grant gets a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
Yep. And Adams thinks they should, if I recall. It's a sore subject to
I
them.
think it's 36 miles.
I think it's a sore subject for them. I've heard from them several times on that.
Anyway,
Yeah, thank you.
we don't get a lot of PILT because we only have a little bit of Hanford influence over here, but we do get the generation tax.
Then the litigation amicus program. So we started this program after several years of deliberation. There were a lot of our members not excited about the concept of becoming litigious and starting to litigate. They don't find benefit in government suing government, and at the same time, our members were pretty doggone frustrated with particularly the legislative branch and at times the executive branch. The first litigation that we undertook was a case that required the Spokane County Board of County Commissioners to become a 5-member Board of County Commissioners elected by district. We believe that was a violation of the uniform system that the Constitution requires for county government. We prevailed at a lower court level. It was appealed, and ultimately, let me just say, ultimately the court overturned about 110 years of case law as well as Attorney General opinions in regards to this. And the court ultimately said it was uniform to counties over 400,000, therefore it is uniform. And that was a different take.
It's uniform if you're different.
Yeah, it's uniform. You know, that we actually utilized that to strengthen the ability for counties under 40,000 not to have a medical examiner and to be able to enter into an agreement with other counties to deliver those services, not have one, have it appointed by the county legislative authority. So we took that uniformity clause and that ruling and leveraged it to make changes to the medical examiner statute. So while it was a loss, we quickly ended up utilizing it in a statute change. The second case that we recently had was a mixed bag. I would say more than not, it was a disappointment. It was the unfunded mandate case. We had 3 counties co-plaintiffs with us, Snohomish County, Whitman County, and Kittitas County, and they were co-plaintiffs. This was a statute that required counties to put in 250 new ballot drop boxes, cost of about $1 million, new operation costs of about $250,000 annually. We sued under the unfunded mandate statute that was passed largely as a part of several initiatives, including Initiative 601, which basically said, listen, state, you can't increase the size of government by passing costs on to other governments and therefore avoiding your cost expansion. So we sued. We prevailed at King County Superior Court level. State appealed that to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued an interesting ruling, one that really was not introduced at the lower court level. And this was that the controlling statute already provided for reimbursement and already envisioned a manner in which counties would be reimbursed. And that is through the cost accounting process that county auditors can utilize to collect the cost of elections, that they should simply factor in the cost of new ballot drop boxes into their cost of elections, and therefore cities, port districts, school districts, everyone else who we run the cost of elections for would pay their proportional share. We did get clarity that the state had their obligation as well to pay for their proportional share of those, which is generally in every other year, not much. Depending on what's on the ballot, it's only in, I guess, even years where the state really accepts some larger cost of obligation. And ironically, that was the year I think they were not even having to pay at one point as well, till recently. So we, long story short, I think it was a mixed bag, generally disappointed. There's little case law around the unfunded mandate statute. This provides a little bit more understanding of the implementation of around unfunded mandates. I think it's not the last unfunded mandate litigation you will see from us. we have reminded folks about unfunded mandates more than once, and at the same time, when they passed their last set of criminal justice reforms, they gave counties $30 million to implement those as well. Wasn't enough, I will tell you that, but it certainly, we think the unfunded mandate litigation certainly has made them aware that we're not afraid to litigate if we think they're not providing us the resources to implement their statutes. And then the indigent defense is one where maybe I'll go down to Blake decision. So we are a part of litigation with 21 other counties. It's oftentimes seen now as the Benton v. State. Benton, I think, is maybe first alphabetically in the lawsuit, so they are the ones that are first referred to in this case. This is to make sure that the state follows through on what we think is their obligation to pay for all costs associated with implementing the Blake decision, the cost of legal financial obligation refunds, the cost of any adjudication associated with vacations and resentencing, and we are probably most interested in making sure that if there are any future civil lawsuits that come about because of anyone that was arrested via this unconstitutional law, that we would be able to tender those cases to the state of Washington, and the state of Washington would be obligated to deal with any costs associated with that and any defense associated with that. So we have are just now in the process of discovery. We've got our who's going to be deposed list is starting to be, so we're early in the case associated with this. We've not pushed it too far because the state has in fact been willing to assure that they are paying for it right now. At the same time, there's another lawsuit that's out there. It's more on the Civil Survival Project lawsuit. The risk pool, I think you are part of the Washington County risk pool as well. The risk pool is more interested in that one because it is the potential for true assessments and true liability, and so their association is more active in that one. But we want to make sure that if there are civil lawsuits that emerge from this, that it's very clear that the state of Washington is obligated for those claims. Then the last one is indigent defense. We spend $160 million in the 39 counties on indigent defense every year, $320 million a biennium. We get reimbursed about 4% from the state of Washington. We rank almost at the bottom of the list in state shared revenues, not just to the trial court system, but also to indigent defense. There's well over half the states, it's fully funded by the state. We are in the near bottom. Idaho's right in the midst of the process of transitioning to own and accept indigent defense, so it's an interesting model that we're looking at as well. So we have the authority from the Board of Directors now to proceed with challenging the state's administration and lack of funding of the constitutional responsibility of the state to fund indigent defense. The state will argue that they have delegated that authority and they have constitutional authority for that delegation, and that they've given us taxing authority to pay for that service, and they've met their constitutional duty with those two actions. So stay tuned to that. The state was not convinced in an earlier case out of a juvenile case that ACLU brought against the state of Washington in a juvenile case out of Grace Harbor County. The state Supreme Court was not convinced that the state had met their duty, but they also recognized that the issue was not fully briefed in front of them, and they remanded that back to Thurston County Superior Court, and ACLU dropped the case because they were less interested in who paid for it than that the service was actually delivered. So I don't know if anyone has any questions. We have Amicus briefs that we're going. Anyone has any questions on where we're at with the litigation program? I think we'll be doing an analysis of the program. It's entering its 5th year, and is it working as we intended? We actually had established some metrics and some things to evaluate the program by. So I think we'll be looking with some members who are interested to say, is it doing what we intended it to do, or do we need to pivot, go somewhere else, continue, not continue, be more aggressive, or do something different in relationship to how we are litigating?
I'll offer that my anecdotal evidence, interactions with state reps and state senators, is that they have always been well aware of WSAC and the fact we represent 39 counties. But I don't know that they ever internalized it like they did when we started actually filing suits. And I think you alluded to it earlier. When they're drafting legislation, I think the fact that WSAC is more, let's say, assertive about holding them accountable through the courts, I think they're more careful about how they're writing bills. And when we come talk to them, we express a concern and we talk about who pays for what. And I think it has captured the attention more than maybe we perhaps realize. Now, whether that translates to action, yeah, we'll see. But we definitely put a flag in the ground, and I think the members largely have noticed that. We'll see.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's still, the jury's still out in many regards, so to speak, but we definitely, I think at the time, the members were extremely frustrated with the, I think with the arrogance maybe of the legislature and the belief that if they're not going to hold themselves accountable to the statute, then we should be willing to.
They've never believed in the past, in my experience, that we had the collective, not sure what to put in there, but the collective motivation, let's say, on behalf of a majority of counties to actually take them to court. I think we surprised them with that, and we'll see.
Yeah.
I think in
You
some
don't have
of
to
our,
win the cases to make the point. I'm sorry.
that's just what I was going to say.
No.
You don't have to win the case to necessarily win. And I think you're right. We haven't won some of the cases, and pretty disappointing, you know, even using our own metrics, but I believe that it's made a difference. I know in the bills last year, the Lorraine Loomis Act would have affected almost every county. I think part of that, and having Paul Jewell go in and work on the bill and not attacking it or just taking a total defensive posture, but saying, you know, you're supposed to pay for this and it's not paid for. You know, you're not, and just pointing out the deficiencies in the bill that weren't going to get anywhere, it got their attention also. So.
That's exactly right. In the past, we would say, you're supposed to pay for this, and they would go, yeah, whatever.
And we're going to oppose it.
Now they go, oh, it's a difference, it is.
Yeah, and it's frustrating. You know, we have an acronym that has been levied at us called SCUM, so-called Unfunded Mandate. You know, unfunded mandate does have a statutory definition, though. It is a cost that the legislature has brought upon us past 1993, I think it is. So there, you know, the Indigent Defense is not an unfunded mandate. We have owned that since statehood as a responsibility, so we understand that. But as they propose new legislation, that is a statutory violation if they pass a cost on to us. So our job is to constantly try and not just use unfunded mandate as a term of art, but be very precise in its use. It's an unfunded mandate when you pass a new piece of legislation that drives up a cost to counties. The Uniform Guardianship Act is one that we've been paying a little bit of attention to within the courts. It was a new bill. Is that going to drive our costs up? So those are the things that we are really trying to hone even the use of our language on unfunded mandates. Kind of page 2021, our annual conference is November 15th, 16th, and 17th in King County this year in Renton, Washington, at on Lake Washington, a fairly new property. We were going to be there a couple years ago, and then COVID hit, so we did not have that conference. So we're back utilizing that contract. Hope you can be able to join us during that period of time. We'll have a number of our affiliate groups back as well, so it's a good conference. We talked a little bit about the things we've been working on associated with some of our business services programs. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We launched a job board this year in the first quarter of 2022. We've got about 50 county jobs that are posted on that. So if you want to utilize our county jobs board, please feel free to send those our way, and we'll get those posted into there as well. We are, for our newly elected officials, we did not only our newly elected officials training, but we launched our County Development Institute for our newly elected officials. That's all online, and people can take those trainings at their own pace. We were doing water training right now. We've got 5 water sessions. I think we have next water training, I think next week, I think it is the third one. We did a forest training. It's really around the interesting element that as we see new elected officials coming on, they oftentimes don't have the same background that previous elected officials had, or they don't have the experience. And so trying to bring some of our members up to speed on some of the issues that are very important for you has been part of our job within that training as well. Pages 22 and 23 show some of our business partner programs. Our largest one is nationwide insurance, the Deferred Compensation Program, the 457 program. All of our counties participate within that program, and we are in the top 5 of participants throughout the nation in this program. So again, encouraging our employees to do that. I think we have 5 counties now that are actually providing a match to that deferred compensation program as they have negotiated in contracts. They've negotiated a small contribution, a matching contribution for those employees that are willing to match their future retirement dollars as well. So that's a pretty strong program that has been going on as well. Then I would just add the importance of some of our programs, pages 24 and 25. We have a Coastal Counties Caucus that it works around Puget Sound largely, a little bit with the oceans as well, but Puget Sound Partnership and the work that we're doing in restoring Puget Sound. The Columbia River Caucus, we actually find ourselves statutorily embedded, where the Columbia River, Office of Columbia River has to consult with county legislative authorities above the Bonneville Pool. And so we've got the Columbia River Caucus that meets about quarterly, and Wes McCart's the chair of that group. Ron Wiesen out of Skagit County is the chair of the Coastal Caucus. And then we have our Timber and Public Lands Program. Commissioner Lannon out of Skamania County is the chair of that group as well. They largely deal with DNR timberlands, probably the major focal point, but there's more and more discussion about also looking at trying to look at the Northwest Forest Plan and trying to re-engage with it. And then I would just say our staff resources that are available for you, so please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us anytime. If you don't know which one is the best person to contact, please don't hesitate to contact myself in general. If it's dealing with policy and legislation, Melanie McAleenan. If it's dealing with one of the program areas, you can see some of those folks as well. So just really encourage you to use this as a resource and help however we can. And with that, I think, we really like to use, time to see what's going on in the county, find out what some of the issues are. We collect kind of the themes and say, we didn't realize some of those, and we are seeing some themes certainly emerging. And we started in May, I think, was our first set of courthouse briefings, and took a little pause. We're back doing them in June, and we're trying to do 22 this year. We're trying to do half the counties is our goal. We have 39, so we're trying to do 22 this year, and we're making a 4-county swing today and tomorrow.
Well, since you're on staff, that's kind of where you wrap there. I just think we'd be remiss if we didn't put into the record that WSAC's got just an absolute all-star team. I don't want to call out individual names, because then the ones you don't mention will say what, but there are some real rock stars. They really are. I'm been doing this not as long as you, but quite a while, and the ability to call up some of the folks, and I'll just throw out Juliana and Paul and Melanie, they're just the depth of their knowledge and the fact that they stay so current, even out of session. You can call them up and they know what bills are being formulated and who's saying what, and that's just tremendous value to the counties. And I don't think everybody sees it. I don't think they see what an all-star team it is. So I just wanted to put that officially on the record that we're very fortunate, I think.
Thank you.
I love the way that you move conferences from east side to west side and back and forth, so that we move the financial benefit around the state.
What are some of your things that are big issues for you?
Well, defer to our chairman, but I've got a few I can share as well.
Inflation, all this government money, the hardship that's putting on everybody. You can't keep handing out this money and expect inflation not to hit. And we haven't seen the worst of it yet. We got farmers out here that are trying to figure out whether to fertilize or not. And everything that's petroleum-based, tires, you name it, oils, twine, everything's went up exponentially. We're all trying to figure out where the benchmark of the dollar is right now. Sure, our profit off of some of this hay is, crops are, it's up, but how does it, where's the benchmark with inflation? We don't know. Everybody's guessing. These are volatile times. We just had our budget meeting today, and I suggested that we start getting ourselves set up for the fall, because it's gonna happen. Not this fall, but the fall of our currency. It's coming.
So with the inflation of costs, is any of that going to be able to be passed through on the other end for in the ag world? As far, I mean, in what they're going to get for their product.
If it gets passed through, it gets passed through to the consumer. You tell me, they're paying the fuel prices too. Are they gonna be able to endure? I mean, I'm glad to see we went to virtual, because it's good to be able to still be able to meet and not expend the money to travel, because it is getting costly, and we haven't seen the top end of the fuel price yet. I mean, we've got a president that blames Russia for invading Ukraine, but he turned the spigot off in this country.
Yeah, I think inflation, we talked about this, you know, what, from a county cost perspective, how's that gonna play out, in particular labor?
We're getting ourselves set up. We're trying to rebuild our emergency fund. $3 million emergency fund ain't gonna last very long. If the sales tax, and to me, I think sales tax is way up because of the COVID pandemic, the fear of being out and mingling, and people stayed at home and ordered. That's why our sales tax is up. But when this money runs up, the government's passing out, the sales are gonna decrease, and therefore the sales tax will decrease. That's what, we had a meeting this morning, we're trying to get ourselves set up to where we can function as a government and stay the course and get through this storm that's headed our way.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. You know, in 2008, I don't know specifically Franklin County, but across the 39 counties, we had a 10% reduction in workforce. Number of counties,
10%.
yeah, number of counties never rebuilt that 10% either. They just, whenever they were able to generate it for revenue, it was not for new staff, but it was to pay for, you know, the staff increases to those that we have, compensation for those we had, healthcare cost increases, et cetera, retirement cost increases.
We cut our budget and our staff between 9 and 10% all at once, and we held the line for a lot of years. We've had a real influx with retail sales tax dollars, and our growth here is off the charts. We've got a lot of new property coming under the tax roll, so we're feeling flush. And candidly, there's been a lot of spending on new positions. My fear is that obviously interest rates, I shouldn't say obviously, I'm absolutely convinced interest rates are headed upward quickly this fall and into the winter. And I see recession coming. And with the size workforce that we're creating and the salaries that we're having to pay due to inflation, that's going to collide with recession, and there will be layoffs. It's, I think, inevitable. We saw it in the 2010 window there, and we got ahead of it. I think there were half a dozen counties statewide that got ahead of it. We did. We weathered it pretty well, but it cost us 10% of our workforce. And I fear that's coming again. We won't be the only county.
You won't be. I know that talking with folks in the past and having seen this is you cannot, you hate to say the word cut, you can't cut early enough. The longer you wait, the more draconian that you have to get.
Right. You absolutely have to get ahead of it.
We were at the county, I don't know when it was, it might have been this morning, talking about 4-day work weeks.
Oh, that was this morning.
Yep.
Walla Walla.
talking about, if we had a number of counties go to 4-day work weeks during recession. One county never came back out. I think Cowlitz is still at a 4-day work week. Went to 36-hour work weeks, I think.
Well, and that's the other thing is employees. It's hard to find people that want to work. We got people out there that have been working overtime to find people to work. They're not. When the spigot of funds is available. When the spigot of funds are available free from the government, people don't want to work. It's the incentive to work. And Amazon, building these 2 big buildings out here, they have, I heard they put a hold on that because they can't find the people to work in the buildings. So when are they going to come online? I don't know.
Historically, the county, a county road crew job was one of the most coveted jobs in the workforce. And we have counties that can't find folks to work on the road crew.
Yeah, it's not just road crew. You can't find planners, you can't find engineers. And what you really have to struggle now is on the indigent defense side to find qualified, eligible attorneys who will take the contracts at the kind of rates that we're able to pay. And a lot of them they'll take a contract for a time and then they'll either have caps or they'll head back into the private sector. I talked to Melanie McAleenan, one of our team members, and just floated the idea that maybe at some point we hear from either the state or maybe from some county level indigent defense managers and the kinds of challenges that they're facing and the kind of costs, because they might obviously be on the other side of our prosecutorial process. But keep in mind that the more people that come through the prosecutor's office, that's more work for indigent defense. And while not every case gets prosecuted, I forget what the ratio is, but for however many cases come into the PA's office, they only charge a certain number. So the staffing impact and the ability to find attorneys is affecting the prosecutor's office, not as much as indigent defense, but more, because like I say, every case that comes in, they've got to evaluate, and then the ones that trickle down to indigent defense are the ones we actually have to pay to defend. That's going to be a big challenge, because we're not going to be able to just go in and cut that staff. We don't have a choice.
You're hitting on one of the challenges that we are dancing around on our litigation program, is the inequity in the uniform application of justice. We have counties that, for example, you may not have an indigent defense attorney available for first appearance, so you see charges being dropped. And is that fair that we're running a system that in Franklin County you might always have an attorney for first appearance because you have enough attorneys and you compensate enough, and then you go to an adjoining county that doesn't have enough attorneys, or whether it's for compensation or not, that then is dropping charges on first appearance.
Yeah. Geographically derived justice.
Absolutely. Justice by geography is absolutely true. And so, we're dancing on this because we also don't want to subject counties to liability and exposure for inadequacy of running an indigent defense system. At the same time, the state has driven the inadequacy in the ability for us to have that uniformity in indigent defense. So we've actually even approached the Public Defender Association to be a co-plaintiff. They are similar in nature, that they're not as concerned about who's paying for it, that it gets paid for. But there are elements that I think that a number of groups that would not be our normal partners in litigation that will have interests in elements of our litigation.
And they'll have a slightly different take on legal qualifications and case caps and other things, but still there's enough common ground that it makes sense. Yeah, and I had mentioned to Melanie that maybe that's the subject to one of our Monday deals.
Virtual
but
assemblies,
I think the topic is good. I don't know that having someone from one county, our indigent defense manager was throwing his hand up saying, I'll do it. And I said, well, I'm just looking for information right now. But
yeah, it might be interesting to have, we've talked about this, and we're actually working through a study as part of our litigation to have, when There are some counties that actually have departments for indigent defense. It's a county department. There's others that have a manager and then manages a hybrid of both staff attorneys and contract attorneys. There's other where it's all contract attorneys, and it's, well, as we learned in Walla Walla, it's managed out of the commissioner's office. So you have a variety of ways it's being delivered and having a cross-section of those. But we know there are a number of counties that they simply are not finding attorneys, flat out not getting attorneys.
Also, when you were saying, I'm going to back up a little bit on, you know, trying to find workers. I just think it's, I mean, inflation is feeding into it, but you know, with COVID, we had a lot of, I'd say, professional or semi-professional jobs that people just retired from. Our planning director, she was qualified and retired. You know, that's one more, that's a planning director level that's not in the pool for anybody to hire now. And so, you know, we do have a shortage across the board, whether it's on entry-level jobs such as you were talking about at Amazon or at the professional level. And, you know, with the virtual ability to work remotely, you know, you don't have to live in King County to get a King County wage. You know, you can be in Jefferson County and drive to King County once a week and be able to have a much better salary than probably what Jefferson County would pay you for the same job. So I think there's a lot of that, and basically poaching each other's employees in the public sector. And I'd probably the same thing in the private sector.
So Eric, there's two real challenge areas. Actually, there's many, but a couple that come to mind. I'd be interested in what you're hearing from other counties. One is on autopsies and medical examiners. If you're not a big enough community to be fortunate enough to have a medical examiner, then you have to contract. For quite a long time. We've actually had to drive across the state and deliver deceased individuals to have autopsies performed. And sometimes we can get MEs to come in and do them here, but it's a shortage area. Are you hearing that from other places? I'm thinking we're a, you know, top 10 metropolitan area in the state. The smaller communities must really struggle.
Yes. Some of them have agreements. Spokane County, ME does contract with a number of our jurisdictions. Whatcom just hired a new ME, their account, Charter County, they just hired a new ME, and so they're working in partnership with, you know, San Juan County, and
We contract out.
So there's some of the Pierce County, King, Clark. So there's a couple counties that have MEs on the west side.
Snohomish, I think, does.
Snohomish has an ME, King has an ME, Clark has an ME, Pierce has an ME, and Whatcom. So they all contract, and so they have that's in the west probably a little bit better. I do know that I was just talking with Commissioner Gross at the timber meeting last Friday, and he was expressing very similar issues around a couple of things around the medical examiner, but more around in the coroner's office, and some concerns in just costs associated with those. But
and the other,
it's a national crisis from what I'm told on the availability of MEs. So
the other topic area that is a big one for us right now, and I'm sure it is for everybody else in the state probably, is behavioral health. We did, after many years, finally pass the 1/10 for mental health and substance use disorder, which is great. We didn't start collecting that till April of this year, but obviously it takes a little time for the funds to accumulate. We're working at setting up a partnership with Benton County, and so I've discovered, or I should say I believe for a number of years, that it can be challenging for two counties to have a bi-county program unless both counties have an equal voice in policy and finances, right? Because they're separate, independent legislative bodies representing different populations of taxpayers. And there was a time, a decade or more ago, when that was a little bit of a challenge with us in Benton County. They're 2.5 times our population. They spend 2.5 times as much on the programs, they contribute 2.5 times as much, and there was a point in time when they wanted 2.5 times the vote, and of course, that's problematic when you're talking about money. State money that's fenced per county, not a problem, but local funds becomes an issue. So Commissioner Delvin and I had some long conversations about it, and some of our programs we've evolved into one county will operate it, and the other county will be a client customer. And there's pros and cons to each. As a client customer, we have the benefit of predictable costs and the ability to recommend changes to services. And if we don't like it, we always have the option to go elsewhere and do our own. We did that with Human Services several years ago, and it's actually worked out remarkably well. So with that sort of as a preamble, are you seeing those kinds of relationships across the state, and are you seeing any other approaches other than the standalone county and the partnership model I just described? Are any new ideas out there that I'm not seeing?
I was just going to say our biggest problem, like everyone has concurred for several years, are that our jails are our biggest mental health facilities, and that's not helping. It's not helping the county. It's not helping the individual. And any given time, you have a lot of people in jail that should be probably in Eastern Washington. But how we take care of that, I think, varies across the state. Except there are a lot of partnerships and a lot of contracts with individual, I guess I'd say services.
Yeah.
In my area, and I'll say area because it's in Skagit County, a couple of the tribes have built facilities, but they're open to all patients within our 4-county region that makes up our Northwest Regional Council.
That's mental health treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have the same issue with juvenile justice too, and you're well aware we have Martin Hall up north. I've talked to some of the mental health providers for juveniles in our system and asked them specifically about were they familiar with Martin Hall and pros and cons, and should we as a distant county be looking to contract. And I'll offer that it brought up some pretty interesting red flags, things that I hadn't thought about. Not just the fact that the transports apparently are being provided by an independent third-party for-profit entity, and those costs can be substantial, and they're paid for by the county, not by the Martin Hall administration. But the other one was that some of our therapeutic programs for juveniles and for their families, and sometimes combined, they said were completely, in their opinion, incompatible with having a juvenile offender here, and even if they're only going to be there for a couple of days, running them up to Martin Hall where they're out of reach of the family, which sometimes is productive, but in their opinion more often was detrimental to the mental health treatment that they were trying to give the family unit. So I bring that all up because I know, Eric, it's something you've been interested in, something you've been looking at, and I've talked with Scott Hutzel, of course, up in Lincoln County. And it almost makes me wonder if we shouldn't be trying to replicate something like Martin Hall, geographically smart elsewhere in the state. Anybody thinking or doing anything along those lines?
The West, some in the West are definitely looking at that and thinking about that. And I've not heard it necessarily just like in Southeast or something, but definitely for example, Cowlitz, again, it's a county of 120,000 or whatever they are right now, 3 to 5 kids a night, 24/7 type of operation. They need to build a new juvenile detention facility. They're looking at options to someone that could serve that entire Wahkiakum, Pacific, Lewis, where in some situations, or just that whole regional nature, a kid from Packwood, it might be closer to Yakima for that family than to come into Chehalis. It's 75 miles to Chehalis versus just going up over White Pass. And that's true of so many different counties that have some geographic challenges. And so is there some regionalization that could occur from that perspective? So the issue about staying close to the family, perhaps, which is one that I've heard from Superior Court judges in particular as well. Yeah, it's a tough one because the average stay, even I think in a juvenile facility, we just learned is what, 4 days?
4 days.
4
Right,
days.
right.
So that's a lot of transport for a 4-day stay. I don't know how you
And,
get
and
financial.
I think Martin Hall is 180 or 190 bucks a day, plus you're paying for the transport. So even if they're only there for a day, it's a transport up, it's a day or two in the facility, then it's a transport back, and that same thing, that cycle repeats for whether it's hearings or whatever.
Right.
You mentioned the Superior Court judges, they are effectively over the juvenile justice program, so their voice carries a lot of weight, as I know you know.
Yep, except you get to define the facility. It's
Yeah.
an interesting
Well,
conundrum.
We have a retired hospital, if you will, I'll call it, in Kennewick, and you've probably talked to Commissioner Delvin about this a little bit, but Benton County is looking at purchasing that, and if they can't use it for the mental health facility that we had originally envisioned, that maybe that would be a juvenile justice treatment facility. I can't imagine that it would ever, well, anytime soon that it would be on a scale with Martin Hall, but I could see it as a regional facility here.
Yeah. We, I don't know if anyone was able to join, or if not, it'll be taped. On Monday, we had an individual from the state administrator of the courts that did a really interesting presentation on trends in juvenile facilities, not only in Washington State, but kind of overall trends in detention in particular. And
Yeah.
it is shrinking, and COVID only exacerbated that. But they even did some analysis to explore what the projection would have been without COVID, and really shows in general
Facilities are going down.
facilities are going down.
So help me out a little bit, when you say facilities are going down, the
Number of
number of available
juveniles
beds
that
or
are-
number of offenders?
number of offenders that are in detention and the period and the length of time.
Yeah, so I had another meeting at the same time as that one, I regret missing it, but was there any consideration of COVID effects and whether or not emerging in a post-COVID environment, whether those numbers are expected to go back up?
They did some forecasting based off of past years, based off of laws, based off of juvenile laws, based on a series of things. They did some forecasting, and that is in there as well. And no, there's, I would say that in general, their forecasting's more of a stable number than just a continued decline, but definitely on the downward trend.
Yeah, there's been some Blake-like decisions for juveniles that have allowed them to come in and come before a judge and, having violated probation, be told that, you know, here's a fine and don't do it again. And that cycle repeats 3, 4, 5 times before there's any accountability, and it's been described to me as Blake-light.
Not to interrupt, but isn't there some discussion of raising the age of juvenile offenders to 19 or 20?
It's an interesting, yes. And we probably will have some future discussion on that. And it's an interesting dialogue, but yes, so there is discussion of what I call elementary school, junior high, and high school, or whatever you want to call it, is that there's the 18 to 21-year-olds, and discussion of not having the 18 to 21-year-olds incarcerated in a state or in the county jail and treated at some intermediary, not even through Superior Court potentially, but there's been proposals. I suspect those proposals will be back. At the same time, juvenile court administrators will say we don't want 14 through 18-year-olds being in with 18 to 21-year-olds. And so there's, you know.
And that was a proposal.
Yeah, and that was the proposal, was you're going to have complete, and you could have it clear down to 12-year-olds actually within that. So, yeah, there is, and that'll be back on the legislative agenda. Our bigger concern probably will continue to be is how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for the capital infrastructure for that? How are you going to pay for the potential need for 24/7 operations in 3 different facilities now?
So I have a question. In your travels through the 39 counties where you've been so far and where you're going, are you hearing any concerns about the dilution of the health boards?
Dilution of what, I'm sorry?
The health boards.
1152.
1152.
Oh,
Go ahead. I can tell you what I've heard.
go ahead, and then I'll.
Yeah, you know, it is really funny. Yes and no. We have a number of counties that had already taken, for example, Mason County had already broadened their health board. They had to tweak it a little bit, so for them it was, you know, no big deal. It was interesting. We have a county that was able to stay with just their elected officials in Tri-Northeast, but they have to create an advisory board. And that advisory board, the bureaucracy of creating the advisory board, they were actually thinking, I think I might prefer the dilution of the Board of Health rather than having to create two bureaucracies and serving those. So we're not going to get any changes to 1152 this year because it's going to be, at least that's what we've heard from the prime sponsor, that they are going to see what happens with our implementation of 1152, how it goes, and then I think we'll be better posed to say, what are the changes that we're going to need. Not a single county has received a nomination from the American Indian Health Commission. Not a single county has, and I don't know if we're going to. We're certainly not going. I'd be shocked if we do by
the deadline.
By the deadline, I'd be shocked. By the July 1st, when you're supposed to, seat those, and even those appointments still need the confirmation of the county legislative authority. We've made that.
So the governor
perfectly
can't
clear.
appoint someone?
Nope. No statutory authority for the governor to appoint anyone.
I would
Or the
just,
Secretary of Health, I
Nope.
should say.
Yep,
No?
nope.
I would just echo Eric, at least just what I've heard and been on the calls and in our area, everybody's is a little bit different, so there's a little bit of different tweaking that needed to be done to meet the requirements. Our personal Board of Health, we have to add one person, which is, I believe, our tribal representative. So, and we had already, I don't know if you'd call it diluted, but we have one incorporated town, so it's the 3 commissioners, the one elected from town of Friday Harbor, and one other citizen, and that was our board. So we're pretty much there. I think and then we add a tribal representative, and we pretty much hit the mark.
Do they get to vote on financial?
No, that in the 1152 that was reserved to. Well, at least in our policy, it's
Yeah.
reserved for the council.
We ran that to ground pretty hard this past week with our legal counsel, and it's very clear in the statute that the non-elected members may not participate and vote on, and I can't remember it verbatim, but essentially any of the fees and charges that the health district charges to clients, customers. But they do have a voice and can vote on the budget for the health district.
For the district.
For the
district.
For the district. The counties, of course, vote and decide on their contributions. And there's, in the statutory language, it refers to agreement. The boards of commissioners, or the elected body, I should say, and the non-elected, there has to be agreement there. So the non-electeds cannot drive the county's expenditures or their budgeting or their contribution. But they do get to vote on the broader health district budget according to our, I think, pretty thorough legal review.
Yeah, they cannot stipulate what you transfer, if you
Right.
transfer, or if you even make a transfer.
Right. Nor can they vote on any
On
of the
fees,
fees
setting
and charges.
fees, charges, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah. And there was also a discussion about whether or not the number of non-electeds is to be equal to or greater than, or simply equal to, and I know, Eric, you and I have talked about this too. The statute, right or wrong, good or bad, says equal
Equal,
to.
yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yep. So, Commissioner, it's a question I deal with a lot, and I talk to the legislators a lot about how poorly 1152 was drafted, how poorly it was thought out. It is what we have. We understand that. We've suggested tweaks and changes from who recruits to who approves to all sorts of things, but they're not interested in any changes until they see implementation. And even the manner in which a tribal representative is to be selected, which does not appear like it is going to pan out. So do you have to keep that seat open? For how long? Do you go without that seat, or do you add, for example, if you only have X amount of electeds, and you have 3 non-electeds, do you hold a seat open for that tribal position? Or do you fill it with the 3 categories? And we don't,
There isn't an answer to that.
there is no answer to that.
No, no,
Nope.
it's contradictory. You can't be
It's-
equal and have a vacancy at the same
Yeah,
time.
so, yep,
That and that they guarantee that there will always be an even number for the vote.
Right.
Never
The,
figured that.
the statute says implement by July 1. Everybody I'm talking to is saying, you know, if you're making a good faith effort toward accomplishing it by July 1, you're golden. Most counties, I'm hearing, you know, they don't think that they're going to get their arms around this before November, December. Is that consistent with what you're hearing?
I know there's a number of counties that have, are in the process of trying to meet the July 1 deadline. Some that have already made the changes, some have minor tweaks to make, so it's not a big significant, but if they're moving completely to it, it's a little bit more of a challenge.
We're looking at September, October.
And a number of those that have to modify their advisory committee if they have one to meet the statutory intent of the advisory committee.
And do you know if anybody is talking to AIHC, the American Indian Health Commission, about working with us?
Yes, we have
Okay.
had that conversation and had meetings with them directly. We've subsequently talked to legislators about it as well. So,
Is there
because we
a
don't have,
reluctance? Are there concerns that still need to be worked out?
yes, there are.
Okay.
There is an interpretation by AIHC that every tribe that meets the definition is eligible to have a seat on the health board. We
Okay.
do not share that interpretation. So if you have multiple tribes that have
Federally recognized
federally
and-
recognized
yeah.
tribes and those that, that have, are within your boundary, and those that have usual and custom hunting and fishing rights within your
Right.
geographic area might
Right.
have a seat on your board. We just simply do not share that's what the interpretation is. And we draw that conclusion from the fact that the State Public Health Advisory Board does not guarantee that a seat for all 29 federally recognized tribes, nor, and you draw the parallel language down to the county, it is one, it is a representative of tribes.
I don't know that there are counties that simply wouldn't have enough electeds to have an equal
Well,
number.
your county, I can't remember how many UNAs that you have in your county?
We have 9 UNAs,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we have trouble getting one to the table on any given topic.
Yep.
I am gonna do a role that I did way back in college, which will be the bouncer, and thank you very much for your time, as I have gotten the word over here that there's another meeting at 5:05. But I want to thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us this afternoon, and I did not mention it up front, but Eric prepped me for the courthouse, and he said, it is the most beautiful courthouse, and you will be stunned when you walk in. And he goes, and I'm not overselling it. And it is truly fabulous as you walk in those doors, and even just as you walk up the steps. And, you know, it's the only time I think I've liked having a single entry point, because it makes it look so much more expansive once you get onto the grounds, you know, I don't know. It was just my first impression of walking through the door.
well, there's a whole lot of people long before us that get credit for that, but it is a privilege to work in such a neat building. And that fence out there, let me tell you, that's a real deterrent to criminals. I suspect our chairman, if not today, certainly in the day, could have just jumped over it.
Thank you guys for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner.
All right. So with that, if there's no further business, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.